everybody, and welcome to a very summer episode of Office Hours. It is too hot in here for me to be wearing a tweed jacket, so you get hot for t-shirt, I guess, today. We're doing another episode of Office Hours. We're going to answer some questions about role-playing games. I'm going to talk about RPGs. Today we got 3 questions. One of them is about hacking. One of them is about world building, and the last one is about anxiety. So, maybe there's a little bit of hot for teacher today, maybe just a little near the end there, because anxiety can affect everybody, not just game masters. So if you haven't watched Office Hours before, if you're 82 episodes in, you're like, 82 seems like a great place to start. What we're going to do today is, as with most episodes of this lovely show, is we're going to take about an hour and we're going to answer 3 different questions about tabletop game mastering. So those questions come from you. They're not questions that I've thought up, but I've chosen them from a list of all of the questions that you've submitted recently to me by way of my website. So if you're watching this and you're like, these are good questions, but I have a question that isn't one of these, so let me ask mine. If you want to do that, you can. It's easy. Just go to my website. It's www.adam-koble.com. There's an Office Hours link. You can click that. You fill out a form. You can, if you'd like, record your voice, or you can just make a note like I didn't feel like doing that. Most people choose to, which is cool. I like hearing y'all. And we will answer your questions 3 at a time every time we do an episode. So that's Office Hours. In 3 minutes, I've just explained it. Sit down, relax, or stand and walk around. I don't care. It's your life. Do what you want to do. So I'm going to answer some questions. Today, our first question comes from Alex. And Alex is curious about hacking.
Hey Adam, you've talked some in the past about how you've gone about hacking games to be more in line with what your group wants to play. I generally get the idea of the iterative process. Take a thing close-ish to the thing you actually want and tweak it gradually or pull elements from other games until you eventually get something that fully does what you want. But what about when you find multiple things that you want to integrate? I've got a pocket setting of my own that I want to homebrew some mechanical supports for. The whole point of the world is that it's a little bit of everything and doesn't really play well with the traditional class fantasy aspect of many fantasy-based RPGs. I have some ideas of things I like. The feeling of throwing out a big ol' handful of dice in Shadowrun, or the freeform spellcasting of Mage the Awakening, for example. And I know what I want to fix about those games too, generally the high crunch level, so I seemingly have my 2 prerequisites set, things I like and a thing that I want to do. But I have literally no idea how to actually start doing the thing. Take the crunch out of Shadowrun is a simple statement, but I only get about 2 steps forward before I hit a brick wall and inevitably give up and shelve the project. Any tips for how to actually sit down and start the process of hacking, beyond just keep trying until you start getting somewhere? Thanks.
How do we avoid making a, as Alex says, eldritch game abomination when we want to hack a game together? Now this is, I think, a fairly common problem. If you look at early game design in the tabletop space, not game design in general, but role-playing game design, if you look at the sort of early phases, 99% of role-playing game design was, and I'm sure that percentage is still fairly high, but has changed, was a reaction to existing systems, right? Most of the games that came out, I mean, hell, even Dungeons and Dragons is a response to wargaming, right? D&D was, we want to play war games, but we don't want to play Napoleonic war games or ancient history war games. We want to play Tolkien or Conan, but we want our units to be barbarians and goblins and wizards, right? And then a reaction to that was, well, we want small units. We want perpetual narrative. We are reacting to an existing game. We're going to take the things from chainmail that we like. We're going to make Dungeons and Dragons. And then when D&D came out and became really successful, there are all these games that are like, well, we like certain things from D&D. We like the persistent world. We like characterization. We don't like classes, or we don't think combat is realistic enough, or whatever. And then games like Vampire are like, we like role-playing games. We don't want it to be about fantasy. And in a way, this sort of reactive, I like this stuff, but I don't like that stuff, is a big part of how games come to be, right? For me, I looked at, Sage and I looked at Dungeons and Dragons, and we looked at Apocalypse World, and we said we like the mechanics of one, and we like the gameplay narrative of the other. How can we make them work together? But as Alex points out, that is a challenging endeavor. It's a very, very challenging thing to undertake, because I don't think you can, and I'm going to look a bit like a hypocrite here, but I don't think you can just take things from games you like and willy-nilly graft them onto other games to make a hybridized thing that will work. Now, you can do this sometimes. There are specific game philosophies that survive this process relatively easily. Games by similar designers tend to have cross-pollination. Games that function on the same basic mechanical level. OSR games built on the D20 SRD. Those games tend to be operative when you yank stuff from one thing and staple it to another, right? So you could take, for example, space travel out of Stars Without Number and graft it onto basic Dungeons and Dragons pretty easily. You could take spell casting out of any OSR game, really, and graft it onto another one. This is why things like the Black Hack and really the whole OSR movement exist the way they do, because all of those games function off of the same sort of core disciplines, right? Stars Without Number and basic D&D are not fundamentally, in terms of their gameplay loop, all that different, right? They were engineered to be that way. Now, in the same way, you can look at games that were made by the same people, and you can see things that might be able to be transposed. Luke Crane's games, for the most part, have bits and pieces that you can transpose without relative difficulty. White Wolf's games, similarly, with a little bit of greasing of the wheels, a little bit of sanding off of the bumps. You can put vampires in your mage game. You can put werewolves in your wraith game. But taking really disparate stuff, like the dice system from Shadowrun and the magic from Mage the Awakening, can be very difficult, because you're essentially creating something brand new. You're essentially saying, I like these systems and I want them to work together, but they don't speak the same language, right? They might be similar on the surface, right? You might collect a pile of dice for a specific purpose, and it may seem like you could simply say, well, I want Mage the Awakening style magic in Shadowrun, so I'll just replace the D10s with D6s. But they are layers under that, right? The magic system is not everything there is in Mage. The fact that it's a D10 is tied to the greater system. You got to look at the reward structure, how that's backed up by the mechanics. And I think the more games that you're trying to mutilate and rebuild together, the more deep your understanding of those games has to be. I think we see a lot of early game design mistakes that get made when people just try to graft shit together. Now, I've done this before. You can watch me do this, and I feel like what I want to do to make myself seem like less of a hypocrite is justify every single time I've done this. But I'll say this, it's possible, but it requires a really deep understanding of the games that you're playing. Like, I've grafted Mouse Guard's reward structure onto Shadowrun, but I chose first edition Shadowrun because I knew that inspired early Burning Wheel, so I could see the mechanical path, the design path from one to the other. They're not as different as they might sound. And if you don't believe me, compare Burning Wheel's range and cover to car battles, like car chases and battles in Shadowrun, and you will see what I mean. What I'm getting at here is that, I'm not going to tell you not to do this. I'm not going to tell you don't try to find the best things in a bunch of games and hack them together. But I will say, look at that not as the final step, but as the first step instead, right? Look at that as the place where you are starting. You're never going to get a fully functional game out of kludging together a bunch of different mechanisms. It's not going to happen. What you need to do is take those pieces, figure out what it is you like about them, both mechanically, tonally, and I guess narratively, like what kind of narrative do they create? And then you're going to need to repurpose them. You're essentially translating, right? You're taking a piece of French literature and you're translating it into a language that you better understand. And then you're going to take some German poems and you're going to translate those into the language you better understand. You're going to take a bunch of different things from these various games that are kind of speaking their own language, but because you are a fledgling game designer, because you're thinking about the core linguistics, the core mechanical linguistics underneath, you're going to translate all of that stuff into something new. And part of that is defining for yourself what that final language is like, right? You're creating the syntax, you're creating the letters that are used to write it, you're creating all of those things to build this core language. Now, that core language might be built on something, right? In the sense that in Dungeon World, we speak Apocalypse World, essentially, but we flavor with slang from Dungeons and Dragons, right? We use familiar stats, classes, races, monsters, narrative flow, like all of that stuff comes from D&D, but the language we're fundamentally speaking in Dungeon World is the same language that is spoken, albeit with a different dialect in Apocalypse World or Monster Hearts or any number of PBTA games. So the thing here is that it sounds to me like you're getting scared because you're staring down the shotgun barrel of all of these different systems that you know in your game designer's heart do not work together, right? Now, one thing I think you can do, and this is one of my favorite things, is finding a gameplay mechanism that is not super tied to the greater system that you like. Fronts are like this. Countdown clocks from Blades in the Dark also like this. A lot of the GM agenda and principles from the PBTA games. Initiative in Dungeons and Dragons maybe is one of those things, but you can find things in games that can be used as a framework elsewhere if you sand off the various sort of details and replace them with the language that your game speaks. So I guess what you want to do here is lay out all of the various bits and pieces that you've selected from these other games that seem cool to you. Find the stuff that is driving your passion, right? Because that's why you're designing a game. You're not designing a game because you want to get rich necessarily, though, I mean, maybe you are, and good luck to you. You're not necessarily designing a game because the world needs it. You're following your passion, right? You're looking at the games that you like, and you're looking at the parts of those games that you like, and you want the buffet, right? You don't just want one dish, and that's cool. That's a cool feeling. You can do it. I believe that it is possible. It just means translating to make all of those things fit together. So I guess this is kind of like what we talked about when we talk about like licensed games. So when you're making a game either built on an existing license, or you're trying to capture the feeling of a game, whether it's like a video game or a book or a comic or something, you want to capture that feeling, either its setting or its narrative in a role-playing game, you kind of have to boil down the details. Because it's not the magic system from Mage the Awakening that you like, really. Now, I'm not telling you what you like, but if we look into it a little more deeply, what about it is good for you, right? Is it the way that the spells are structured? Is it it is the freedom to create your own effects? Is it the probability that results from the dice pools? Like, what actually do you like about that? I think you hit the nail on the head with the Shadowrun thing, where you said the thing you like about Shadowrun is just using a lot of dice. And I think that's actually like a really valid design approach. Like, honestly, like, I think that we like to come at this stuff all high-minded and say, like, oh, I want to make a game about what it feels like to fall in love for the first time. Or I want to make a game that talks about the deep-seated social content of a particular era of human existence, right? But I think you can also say, I want to make a game that is kinetically super fun to play, right? Like, I don't particularly like the Fantasy Flight version of Warhammer. I don't really like Warhammer 3rd edition. I think a lot of people don't. I think it's not a great game, but my God, did I love all the weird dice. I loved all the different sizes of cards. I really liked all of the like slotting of cards onto your character sheet. All of the kinetic aspects of that game were super fun. They were just attached to a game I didn't like. So I think that's valid, right? DCC is built on this. We want to use D13s and D5s, and that's like a fun kinetic aspect of the game. So like that's cool. Take that, put it on your list of like things that you like, and then do that with all of the other little bits and pieces from other games, right? What do you like about this Mage Magic system? What do you like about that that experience at play, and how does it apply to this design that you are trying to do? So I suppose the real advice here isn't like find places where they kludge together, but dissolving these things into their component pieces and finding what about them you really like. And then create a structure that will feed all of those together. Because once you know what you like about the Magic system, you can pair it up with your massive piles of dice system, and you're starting to develop a game, right? So I don't prefer, personally, I don't prefer kind of homebrew hodgepodging when I make game stuff. But I'm kind of going through that experience right now, right? If you've watched any of the season 2 Far Verona content that I've been doing, any of the GM stuff, I am taking the feeling of Stars Without Number, right? The vibe of the world, right? The way that space travel affects the narrative, the way psionics affect the universe at large, some of the like core truths, capital C, capital T, in that universe. But I'm playing Genesis. We're using the Genesis system, speaking of Fantasy Flight, and I need to adapt not the strict mechanical stuff, right? Not like, here are 10 levels of biopsionic powers. I'm trying to convert what biopsionics feel like in the narrative. What kind of end result do they get? Because here's the thing. You're going to end up with a game, and that game is going to create a narrative. And that narrative, if you explain it later, is going to tell you things about the mechanisms of the game, but they're not going to tell you everything. And for me, my kind of ultimate goal for hacking this season 2 Far Verona content is that in the end, the narrative we create and the stories we tell about that narrative will be recognizable as in being set in a Stars Without Number universe, but will in the moment feel more fun to play. They will engage the players in a way that I think is going to be fun for them according to their sort of fun paradigm. So, you know, I think too, while you're doing this, Alex, just as kind of a final point of advice, think about why you are doing this. And I think this goes for advice for anyone who's doing any kind of game design, whether you're designing a whole system, you're designing an adventure, or you're just designing the bullshit that you need for your next session. Think about why you're doing it. What is it that drives you to do this? Are you solving a problem for your table? Are you answering a question about design you have in your head? Or do you want to make a fully fleshed out game because you think that you have a solid idea in front of you? Use that as your guiding light, right? Continue to try to keep that in your head as your design mission statement and follow your passion, right? Figure out why you love the things that you love, and then that will give you a better understanding of them. And at the very, very least, even if, and chances are very good this will happen, even if your game is a bloated mess that you end up loathing and you throw into your game design trash file, you will now better understand Shadowrun, you'll better understand Mage, you'll better understand yourself, both as a designer and as a player of games. Even a failed design is a good idea. I honestly don't like... I think the only real tragedy of a bad game design is if it gets published and people spend a ton of money on it. That's the only, like, a failed design that just gets put out into the world and is like, look, I did this thing and maybe it sucks, who cares? Or like a failed design that is recognized as bad and thrown away. I think those are great things to happen. I think failure is intrinsic to an art form developing. But whether a game is good or bad, or whether a game is successful or a failure, has so many different metrics that for you, Alex, don't even worry about that shit. Follow your passion. Sounds like you're pretty damn stoked about whatever it is you're working on. So keep at it and keep thinking about why you're doing it. And I think that'll help. Good luck. Game design sucks and it's hard.
Hey Adam, do you have any advice for striking a balance between having a living world and making the game about the player characters? Some games or Game Master advice has you put the adventure around every corner. Anywhere you go, there's going to be something to do. But sometimes it gets hard for me to justify a world where the player characters always arrive when the exciting thing is about to happen, or when there's some unresolved mysterious dungeon or something like that. And never just go somewhere where the biggest problem is that the harvest is a bit thin and nobody likes the mayor. I'm not really sure if this is a problem or just me overthinking things, but I'd love to hear you talk about this for about 20 minutes. Thanks.
All right, let me start the timer. We're going to talk about this for about 20 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, this is a great question because yeah, it's a tough balance, right? The way I solve this problem is by creating worlds in which being alive is difficult. That it's not about every time you turn the corner, there's adventure and excitement awaiting for you. It's about you live in a world where if you don't do things to stay alive, the world will make you not that way anymore. Right? The world is a complicated place full of dangerous conflict. And I'm trying to think if this is true as I'm saying it. So Jace Beleren must die. The premise is the characters are part of a conspiracy against the most powerful entities in the universe, and no one believes that those entities are as bad as that conspiracy does. So if anyone finds out, especially the target of their conspiracy, they are toast. Okay. Dungeons and Dragons. The world is full of terrifying monsters, and there's adventure to be had everywhere if you consider like staying alive adventure. I feel like you got to put the pressure on for a game like D&D. Sure. Court of Swords. Yes. Obviously. Court of Swords is maybe the most like this. And then Far Verona. Yeah, both seasons. Either there is danger out there and you need to deal with it all the time, or you are in danger forever. But I think David makes a great point. Look to the game first, right? Like Dogs in the Vineyard. In Dogs in the Vineyard, it's not about the game being about the PCs, and it's not about adventure being around every corner, but the premise of that game is you are there to solve problems. Ergo, everywhere you go should have problems for you to solve, even if the people whose problems those are would kind of rather that you fucked off. Right? The premise of the game demands it. Burning Wheel, there has to be a situation so that the players can write beliefs. So there has to always be something going on that the players are tied to, and the players feed back to you the kinds of things that they are interested in by way of their beliefs and instincts. Dungeons and Dragons is less this way because you kind of can't run it where the harvest is a bit thin and nobody likes the mayor. Like, you sort of can't, because if there's no adventure to be had, the PCs then have to find their own, and the game doesn't really work that way. You do sort of have to have adventure around every corner. But I get you. I sort of like the idea of there being towns where nothing happens. But here's how I would do that. Look at what the game cares about, right? I'm not going to assume you're playing D&D, but that's usually what people are playing. But look at what the game cares about, right? So understand the game you're playing first. What are the players going to be rewarded for? They should be doing those things all the time. What tools do the players have to accomplish their goals? They should be doing those things all the time, right? It doesn't mean that 100% of the player's time is adventuring or whatever, because there may be systems in the game for downtime. So if you want the PCs to arrive in a town where the harvest is a bit thin and nobody likes the mayor, that's great. That's super great, because you just have everybody show up and be like, well, there actually isn't that much going on. What would you like to do? And the way that I GM, this is like either, and most of my players I think would agree with this, when I say you arrive in a town and they're like, okay, we look around, I'm like, well, all right. So everybody's like a little bit hungry, but they're going to be okay. And nobody really likes the mayor, but there'll be a new one soon. The players will look at me and say, okay, but what's really going on? Like, you're lying to us. Where's the secret lizard cult? Like, who in the village is an awful sorcerer? Like, this is not, you are shitting us because the world we know is full of danger and horror. But if you're not portraying a world like that, if your game is a little bit more pastoral, a little bit more relaxed, this is a great opportunity to just like chill out. So you can say, welcome to the town. The harvest is a bit thin. Nobody likes the mayor, but like you can take a couple of weeks to just do some downtime, right? Lead the town in prayer for a greater harvest. Perform some funerals. Talk to the mayor about improving as a person, or just carouse, like just hang out and let the game focus on the players in downtime, because it's a matter of contrast, right? So you don't have to put adventure around every corner, but remember, your job as the game master, or part of your job, is to illustrate a world that supports the premise of the game and lets the players engage that game in doing what they want to do. Sometimes that means just like bullshitting with the NPCs and doing downtime. But they're going to want to come back to that adventure. And honestly, you can take a cue from the players. And this is where we get into this idea of proactive or reactive GMing. So proactively, you already know how things might go wrong in this town. So if the players are like, well, cool, we're going to take a break and we're going to spend 18 weeks of downtime, proactive GMs might have thought of a seed, or they might have fronts going where they would be like, all right, so yes, the biggest problem in this town is that nobody likes the mayor and the harvest is a bit thin, but a member of the lizard cult arrives in town and begins converting people if nothing else happens in like 2 weeks, right? You've got a front going, or you have some little seed of complication that will drive the game back to that adventuresome place. It's even better if you can have the PCs drag the problem with them to town. They will hate themselves and pretend that they hate you, but make them ruin the town, right? Not necessarily on purpose, but they're PCs. They've made enemies, right? So have their problems follow them to town. If they've clashed with the lizard cult before, the lizard cult is probably going to mess with their moment of peace, right? This is a way to show the world is living, but the PCs drag trouble around with them, right? That's proactive GMing, knowing that you can apply that little seed of chaos to any situation the players are in, and it gives them some downtime, but not an infinite amount of downtime, right? So you can also, if you want to, you can also react, right? Where you give the players time to be interested in the town, and then you listen to what things they are suspicious of, right? See what they investigate, and then complicate those things. So if they show up in town and they're like, the harvest is a bit thin and nobody likes the mayor, I wonder if those things are connected. I wonder if the lizard cult has gotten to the mayor. I wonder if the harvest is poisoned because of that necromancer that we fought 2 kingdoms over. Like, what is going on? Let them investigate the mystery that does not yet exist, and then build that into your prep, right? This is a classic game mastering maneuver where the players come up with their own worst problems, and it's just a question of listening. Just listen to the players while they build their own adversarial content for you. Or they might just show up, do their downtime, get bored, and be like, well, cool, good luck with your new mayor, bye. And they might leave town. And that's great too, because the next time they come back to town, that's when it can be a smoking crater, right? A lot of this is going to depend on the game you're playing and if that game gives you stuff, right? A mouse guard town with a thin harvest and a mayor nobody likes is a big problem, but a D&D town with the same problems, maybe not so much, not so relevant, right? Dog's town's going to be different than a D&D town too, right? So look at the game you're playing, see what it has to say, follow the same stuff that the game wants you to follow. But if the game doesn't give you anything, because a lot don't, if the game has no guidance, look to the tone of your game. Look to what your players expect. Look to what is interesting for you, and talk to your players about this. If you didn't talk about it in session 0, this is a great thing that you can do. So next time you start a campaign, and this is advice for everybody, not just David, but next time you start a campaign, ask your players, like, would you rather a world where we only focus on adventuresome shit, right? Do you want there to be adventure seeds in every single place you visit? Or would you like me to go a little realistic and you have to seek out adventure, right? How much does that... And you know, somebody somewhere with more time than me should totally make some kind of, like, at least for 5e D&D, some kind of like session 0 questionnaire. Like a conversation guide, a lesson plan for session 0. Like questions to ask your players. Things like realistic world where you will have to seek out your own adventure, or cinematic world where every session is an episode of an action-packed TV show, or somewhere in between. Is this a 5 tieflings bard kind of party? Or is it a we choose classes and races with synergy so that we can win Dungeons and Dragons kind of party, right? Someone should make a questionnaire like that. That'd be super cool. Yeah. But this is one of those things. Now, for David, it sounds like it's a little late, but it's never too late. So ask your players. Ask them exactly the same question that you just asked me, right? Say to your players, like, what kind of world building do you prefer? Because I know if my dungeon master asked me this, I would be like, you play the world as it is, right? Don't cater to us. We will cause our own problems. But I'm a very motivated player, right? I hate it when the GM is like, here is what is going to happen. I'm like, yeah, but I really wanted to go and loot that keep over there. I don't really care so much about the Caves of Chaos. I'm that kind of player, but I'm not in David's group. I'm in a David's group, but they're not the same as this Dave, I don't think. So anyway, ask your players, talk to your players, and then follow your own thing, right? And look at how often any given thing is happening. I think that even in a game where the world is a grueling and intense struggle to live, a town in which nothing is really happening is like a nice change. And I kind of think that maybe Court of Swords needs one of these. I think maybe David's question has kind of got me thinking about how it would be fun after the current grueling nightmare that is the characters' lives to just be like, you arrive in a town. There isn't really much going on. It's just kind of chill. And yeah, the people that live in the town are like, hey, look at these weird adventurers, but cool. Welcome. You want some rice? Because it's about tone, right? It's about tone and pace. And part of your job as the game master is pacing the game and setting the tone. So think about that. I don't think there is one answer to this question. I think there's several answers, and it's going to depend on a lot of things. I think both ways and a bunch of different things within those spectrum of ways are all kind of equally valid. And it depends on the campaign. I think I lean towards constant danger around every corner because of my own personal proclivities as a game master. Like, I really like making my players work for it. And this is Burning Wheel. It's Burning Wheel's fault. but I want my players to suffer for the things that they want, so that when they get them, there is that overjoyed sense of finding a pearl amidst swine, you know, where you're just like, I have this thing and I worked for it and I suffered and I nearly died to get this thing that I wanted. And then sometimes the thing isn't exactly what you thought it was going to be, but that's just my style as a game master, but it might not be yours. I know that there are a lot of players who balk at that style or who find it exhausting. And every time I start a new game, I have to kind of balance that. And I do by asking my players, because this isn't just about world building. This is about tone and tenor of the game, because sometimes doing another deadly encounter is just exhausting. And sometimes you just want to beat the shit out of some goblins, even though you're level 18. And that's okay. You just got to listen to your players and listen to yourself and feel it out as you go. So I don't know. Maybe David, maybe it's not a problem, but maybe it's also not you just overthinking things. Maybe it's a little of both, and it's more granular than just one thing. But you got me thinking about it. So thanks for that. I hope this has been helpful. Yeah. Interesting. I wish more games gave us the tools that we needed to answer David's question. I think some do, right? I think Apocalypse World definitely does. Apocalypse World says there are fronts. Fronts always move. There is no rest. And that's honestly, that's a part of the tone of that game. But like Ryutama is just like wander around at your own pace. And I think that Mouse Guard can be either of those things. Mouse Guard can be gritty and grueling, or it can be like picking daffodils to give to Gwendolyn. That's her name, right? But it's always built around the game's particular proclivities and then bent to yours as a GM. So our last question is pretty broad, but I think as a result, one that a lot of people have struggled with before. It's something that I definitely used to and maybe do still, but less so now.
Hey, Adam. I had a question about anxiety and in-the-moment failures for players and GMs alike. I can plan as many cool story threads as I like, conjure up some lovely dialogue in my head, ready to go. And in the moment, I just mess up, anxiety creeping in. And after the session, I'll be thinking what I should have been doing in hindsight. Do you have some tips on how to relax during the game, giving yourself some breathing room while making big decisions, making it easier for the players and for myself? Thanks. I love your content and your hair. All the best.
I like this question because it's not so many questions that we talk about on office hours are, how do I fix this? Right? Like, how do I fuck this up less? How do I do this better? But all Drone is asking is, how do I not freak out about this? Like, how do I just relax? Because you notice we're not being asked, how do I do better? It's just, I feel anxiety and then I screw up and then I feel anxiety about screwing up. How do I just chill out about this? So I heard a really great way to put this, and I'm gonna steal this from my new friends at Loading Ready Run. So before we went into the pre-release, which is a Magic the Gathering event, Magic is a competitive game. It can be very aggressive. Winning can matter a great deal. Sometimes there's money on the line. It can be a big deal for certain people, and that can cause a lot of anxiety. But during the pre-release, which was this Magic event, where none of us had seen the cards before, really, and there was a lot of people watching. They made a point of sitting down, and not just with anybody, but with a judge, a Magic the Gathering judge, to say the stakes have never been lower. And I just felt so free. Like, what a fucking breath of fresh air that is. The stakes have never been lower. And I think that applies here too. Like, I obviously care a great deal about role-playing games. I care a lot about being good at role-playing games. And maybe bigger than that, it matters to me that people perceive me as being skilled and talented at running role-playing games. It's part of my job. And there is that anxiety that every time I screw up a rule, or every time I forget an NPC's voice, or every time someone reminds me, actually, Adam, the last episode you said that it was like this, and now you're saying something different. Continuity error, Adam. Every time that happens, there's a little twinge in my nervous system that's like, you're screwing it up. You're screwing it up. No one's going to like you anymore. You're going to fail. And I have to remind myself, it's fine. Because this is a fluid and improvised discipline, right? Even the most skilled, practiced, and talented game masters have those moments where, like Jerome, feel like, God, I could have done that better. I was ready to do better. I knew, like, I practiced that voice, and in the moment, I just blew it. What happened? And then you can definitely go into that post-game funk where you're like, oh, shit, I suck. What am I doing? Why am I GMing? Why am I playing this? I should just give up. It's very, very easy for that little twinge to snowball into a complete nightmare. So you're not alone. I have those feelings too, and I think a lot of people do. I think the way that I best cope with that anxiety and that cycle of bad feelings is to remember the stakes have never been lower. There is no bad thing that will happen if you forget your cool story thread, or if you deliver that moment of dialogue wrong, or like the stream dies halfway through a session, or whatever. You're only going to get yourself worked up and scared to do better if you let each mistake compound. There's going to be that little voice that'll tell you, like, you're a fuck up, stop doing this. What, like, why? Why are you still trying? But like, yo, it's cool. That voice is wrong. The fact that you're doing it is enough that you should keep doing it. Like, if you like it, confidence will build. Now, when I have those moments, I feel them, I acknowledge them, and I let them go, right? And this takes practice. It's a meditative thing. Like, I will say something and I'll hear myself saying it and be like, this is wrong and I don't like it. This is bad. I am fucking this up. I will finish what I'm saying and then I will let it go. I'll be like, all right, I'll do better next time. It's not the end of the world. To the point where if you want to, and if you are playing with people that you trust, which you should be, if something goes a way that you really don't feel good about, you can redo it. Now, obviously, this gets harder to do the further away from that thing that you get. But like, let's say you portray a character in a way that later you feel is a betrayal of your understanding that character. Or you like have the character do something and you're like, that doesn't make any goddamn sense. My character wouldn't do that. Or this character wouldn't do that if you're GMing. Or like, this would not have happened this way. Just talk to your players. And just say to them like, hey, so I know that the king got upset when you told him that you failed to oust the goblins from the mines, and he had you all thrown in jail. I've been thinking about it, And I think you're right. Like, I think that that's probably an overreaction. I think that betrays what we all know about the king. I think he's kinder than that. So can we find a way to make that work? Can we roll it back? Can we say, you know what? After about an hour in the dungeon, the king comes and gets you and apologizes? Can we play that out? Like, I acknowledge that was a thing that I wish that I had done differently. Can we use the narrative to fix this? We've done this a few times, most predominantly, I think, when we rolled back several scenes at the end of an episode of Far Verona. Yes, I had like a little kind of in-universe joke that I used to justify rolling it back. But really what we were doing was retconning something that had happened that we didn't like. And I think that if you do this, if you are willing to put out that vulnerability and have that conversation as players, it opens up the table to let players do that too. And again, this is a thing you want to have conversations about. How far can you go before rolling back, right? Sometimes we say, once another set of dice have hit the table, that's it, right? Once the dice have had their say, that's the checkpoint, right? We're playing this Iron Man mode, and every time there's a mechanic that is engaged, that's the next autosave. You can't roll back if you don't like the dice results. Maybe that's how you do it, right? Maybe it's a scene, maybe it's a session, maybe you do it case by case, because some things are easier to ignore that they ever happened than others. Sometimes you can say, well, nothing significant has happened as a result of that scene. It was just a bad characterization. Let's just not do it. But you don't always have to go that far. Sometimes you can just make a note in your head, and this is especially good for NPCs. Make a note in your head, that was out of character, and you can justify it in the game. Like, say a character and an NPC are like best friends, and for some reason you think that it'd be cool to have them say something like really mean, and the player is surprised, and later you're like, you know, I don't know why I've changed my mind. I don't like that. You don't have to go back, right? You can look at the ongoing narrative and you can find or invent justification for it. Now, this can feel a little bit like you're covering for your own mistakes, and it is, and you should. Like, honestly, you can have out of character decisions. Like, characters are complex. People are weird. And just because someone is a certain way all the time doesn't mean that they will forever be that way. Like, everyone in their life knows a time when something happened that you did not expect, or when someone acted a way you didn't expect them to act, right? Even the most supportive friends can reach a limit and snap, or maybe they've got bad things going on in their own life that you're not aware of. Sometimes the world acts in totally incomprehensible ways, and we as GMs can use that to our advantage. Now, I'm not saying ignore your mistakes, right? I'm not saying pretend that everything you do is perfect, because it doesn't have to be, and don't hold yourself to that standard. And don't lie to yourself or your players to hold yourself to that standard, but be willing to roll back in the moment and be willing to always learn from your mistakes going forward, right? Because even if you set something in stone and you don't end up liking it and you don't want to roll back or can't roll back, just accept that it was a little hiccup and move on, because the consequences of those actions don't have to be so big, right? They can be fairly minor. Let yourself learn from your mistakes. Just do better next time. And as far as tips for how to relax during the game goes, slow down. Seriously, just slow down. Breathe. Take breaks. Recognize that even in moments of serial intensity, take a deep breath. Make your decision, do the thing, and move on. Just because pacing is tense for your players and for their characters doesn't mean that you have to feel pressured to make a decision you're not ready for. And if you feel that, if you're like, okay, everything is going really fast, the players all want to do something different, I need a minute, Just tell your players like, okay, can we just like take 5? Can we like take a break? And when we come back, I'm going to be better prepared to finish this scene, right? Ask for what you need. Give yourself some breathing room and ask your players for it too. And always remember that it's not a life or death situation. You can always roll back. You can always make adjustments. And it doesn't have to be the end of the world if you fuck it up. And honestly, a screw up that you learn from, a screw up that you learn from is just as valid as a moment of pure success. If you screw up and you learn something about a character or the narrative or your players or yourself, that is more valuable than a perfectly planned moment from which you learn nothing, right? So keep that in mind. Give yourself permission not to do it perfect. Because honestly, I've been doing this for over 25 years, and I still have sessions where I'm like, God damn it, why did I do that? That was a dumb move. But you know what? Learn from it. We're going to carry on. And that creates narrative, right? Narrative isn't perfect either. We're not writing movies here. Well, I mean, I kind of am, but that's a whole other thing. For you, though, take it easy. You're already doing great. The fact that you even think about this stuff means you're doing better than a lot of people. So that's it. That's episode number 82. This has been Office Hours. Thank you to Jerome, David, and Alex for submitting your questions. Appreciate it. They're good ones. I love talking about role-playing games. And I love doing this show live on a day where I then go and play a role-playing game, because the questions that you ask me get my brain all percolating, and then I can just go and do those things. So you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to try and take it slow for Court of Swords. I'm going to just like breathe through it. I'm not going to rush. We're going to try and take it slow. And thank you for giving me that thing to think about. And thanks everybody for coming. Thank you for watching. If you have your own questions, go to www.adam-koebel.com, click the Office Hours link, fill out the form, record your voice, submit your question, and I will answer it on a future episode, or a question very much like it. I cannot believe that we've done 82 episodes of this. We're closing in on 100 episodes. That is magical. Thank you for watching, for making this possible. I will see all of you next time for more Office Hours. Bye, y'all.